Welcome to Heart of the Shaman, episode 13. So, this is our anniversary episode, our first episode in a new year and a new cycle with the podcast. I am Pavan and I'm here today with my beautiful co-host, Betty G.
Morning, everybody.
So, today we're going to be talking about honoring and embracing the ancestors. But first, I wanted to touch on this episode it's a celebration. There's some new things coming down the pipeline. So in this next cycle, we're going to be bringing in more techniques and meditations. And I'm also going to be adding some additional episodes with other females who have been on the shamanic path for a long time and just talking to them about their challenges and struggles and also all the rewards of this type of path and what their unique stories have been. So that's a stay tuned. And then, of course, if any of you have things that you'd like to hear more about, we have had people reach out and share some of that. The crystals has been a big one. Today, we're going to go down a pretty interesting avenue in regards to the ancestors, and I can even feel bringing in some of the ET energy of it. So that can be out there for some people, but as always, take what resonates with you. I have had so many experiences over the years where different types of energies have come in, and it never gives me, right, like a full picture of how everything works or what the story and the narrative is for humanity or anything by any means. But there's little truths that end up popping throughout. So it's really about your own experience and what resonates. So, all right, episode 13, honoring the ancestors. We're actually going to start just with a brief meditation. And I'm going to try out just bringing the drum in as well. So, with every podcast, this is a transmission. And just like if any of you are familiar with the Akashic records, everything in our universe and our experience has its own energy field and energy signature. And so, it's the same for not only the podcast, but all of the listeners, everyone connected to it. We're creating a group, a container, a frequency. And so this drumming and this intention is really about just taking the transmission in a deeper way and at a deeper level. So there's energy here that's beyond the words that we're speaking. And it can be really kind of cool and interesting to see what might shift or what might come up for you after listening to the podcast. So we'll start by just placing a hand over the heart center. And we're going to go ahead and close the eyes, focusing at the third eye point. And we're going to be breathing through the space of the heart. So if you're seated, or you might even be driving or something, in which case you may not be coming into the full expression of this, but you're going to go ahead and inhale through the nose. Just allow the body to be relaxed and exhaling through the mouth. But with each inhale and exhale, the inner visualization is that the breath, along with healing energy, is coming in through the heart space. So breathing through the heart space, inhaling into that energetic center of the chest, envisioning a healing energy and a light, exhaling. And on the exhale, we're also releasing energy from the heart space. And just for the next couple of moments, allow yourself to stay with this inner visualization and just really getting connected to the quality of the energy that you're inhaling and exhaling, any sensations that are connected to it. And we'll go ahead and bring in the drum and a little sound as well. Gently becoming a little bit more aware. So, wherever you are, beginning to have a more grounded sense, feet firmly planted on the floor, having awareness of the breath in the body, and eventually gently blinking the eyes open. All right, beautiful. So, the first thing that's coming to me right now in regards to our ancestors is uh, at first we think about the ancestors who are related to our experience in this life. It might be great grandparents that have passed, and then as we go further back, we tend to have less and less information the further back we go. Um, but I also want to point out that if you're someone who doesn't really have any information about your ancestors or much of your family, the place that we connect the most deeply is through meditation or rituals where we connect with their energy and then they can communicate with us. Different messages can come through. Um, so I have an invocation that I do at the beginning of any kind of ritual that I'm doing, and we're calling in guides, guardians, angels, ascended masters, beings of love and light, and the ancestors. So they're included in the invocation. And over the years, what I've experienced is they tend to have a certain quality and a more personal connection to whatever it is that you're focusing on in terms of bringing through healing and information. So, if that makes sense, like if you're thinking about maybe taking a new job or not taking the job or whatever the example might be, there's a different quality to other guides in the space who might be supporting you than to the ancestors who are connected to your whole story and lineage. And we're going to go a lot of directions with this. I don't know, Betty, do you want to speak to that piece?
Um, I think people more focus on um, where negative things come from.
Yes.
So, before we go there, to in our thought process, we have to really think of the gifts that our ancestors have bestowed on us. Because if they hadn't gone through all of the trials and tribulations or the learning processes and the advancements and the evolution, we wouldn't have the things, the gifts that we have. So even though we may blame a lot of things, the trauma from the past or from um, our lineage, it's the spiritual lineage and the things that they have gifted us with and the advancements that they've made that they dropped on us that we wouldn't have without their struggles. So, you have to think about thanking them and blessing them wherever they are. And in that package of things that come down in our DNA, the things that we have to deal with in our evolution, we have to thank them every time, like you do when you bring them in, to the rituals. You have to thank them for the gifts that they've given us that have made our lives better, that have given us this, what we experience today.
Yeah, and I feel like the more truly connected we are to knowing that and recognizing that and to that gratitude, it really helps us understand ourselves.
Mhm.
So I think like if we're to go into some of the why for honoring and embracing the ancestors, this piece of understanding ourselves better, not just like from a more literal place of what your roots are, right? But like you're saying, this spiritual piece of it. It's like we're born in with certain resources right at the get-go. And sometimes in some of those deeper meditations, I've seen it as like a bunch of marbles in like one of those machines. They still have them like in the grocery stores where you put the quarter in. It's like there's all these marbles, and then say you have a family with different siblings, and there can be some similarities, but sometimes it's like, wow, this sibling is so different than the other, and it's the same family, but it's like all those marbles connected to so many ancestors and all of their experiences. It's like some of the marbles come out the chute and go in the direction of one sibling, and then some of the marbles come out the chute and go in the direction of another. So,
Right.
what is expressing maybe like most at the forefront for one person can be different for another. And then, even when there's things that it's like, okay, this is the trauma that we're bringing forward. Uh, I think even there, it's connected to the lessons that maybe we're meant to learn versus another, let's say, family member, another person. So even when it's something that we're experiencing negatively, or, there's going to be some suffering around, or we have to figure it out, there's even a gift in that. It's like, okay, well, that marble came through to you, supporting your whole kind of makeup in this lifetime. It's like we all have a certain astrology, and we all have a certain constitution, and all of that is connected. So it's really pretty cool in that sense.
Well, we don't factor into it because we don't reel back like a video and watch what they went through to
Right.
acquire that knowledge and to give us that. It's just like in a gift wrapped package, and we have all of this, things that they went through, we didn't have to go through. So we have to be grateful to them and thank them for their failures, even, the
Hmm.
things they lost and the things they suffered and the things that they learned. We are in this incarnation to master the emotions and to learn. So the things that it's like a ladder, they've given us a few steps up. They went through it and we don't have to. Not to say that we don't have things we have to go through to elevate and to evolve with this planet, but just thinking back of, you don't think about I was just looking at pictures. My daughter had old family pictures put on the computer so we can, they were just beautiful. The old 8 millimeter movie camera that we had
Yeah.
when I was like 7, right? So that's
Hmm.
like 70 years ago. And I was looking at these pictures and the innovation of that movie camera at that time. I can look back and see myself walking on the beach, like all of the things that my family went through that I did see are phenomenal, like the different washing machines. And that's one of the things that's, kind of a gift with us being, the cross generational thing, because I remember the first TV. I remember the first answer phone. I remember the first, when my dad woke me up to watch when they took off, and the first satellite went up, and the first dog went into space. And every time there was a launch, he would get my brother and I up and say, "You want to see this? You want to witness this?" And it was on TV. And I mean, now you can just pick up your phone and you can access anything anywhere in the world instantly. But if you see that progression and how that came, like we didn't have any of that when I was a child, so those gifts, even in this generation, in this lifetime of mine, I've seen so many things that have improved our lives. I'm not saying they're all good. I mean, there are, negatives to it, but just to think about how my mom used to use an old washing machine with a wringer, and it was
Yeah.
really cool to have a washer, not have to,
Right.
by hand. Her mother did it on a washboard, but the
Hmm.
way people used everything, nothing was disposable. They used every single thing that they had that they could make something else out of and not be wasteful. Where this is a disposable generation. Everything, you can't fix it, you throw it out and get a new one. You don't keep using the old one and repairing it and replacing parts. And so I think it's important to honor the people that did without, that advanced and brought the things, forward that make our lives so much more fun and so much more efficient. You can, things just happen more quickly. It's less trouble to find information or whatever. I think you have to take a moment and thank those people, even the ones we knew, let alone the ones that were before them, and how hard that was, for them. So,
Yeah.
and it's just they don't, I mean, my dad would say, and to do this for posterity, we have to think about what we're leaving to the children that are on the planet right now that'll, one day be 40 or 70 or whatever, that will look back, and this is going to be part of what they remember that we did, the things that we exposed or the things that we tried to learn and teach and share. So, and there's so difficult of when you can't talk to somebody that's been there, they're on the other side. So,
Yeah.
you have to try to imagine what it would be like not to have lights. I mean, for many, many years, there was kerosene lamps, there was candles, there was torches, there was no electricity. I mean, now everything is based on even the cars, right?
I like to feel like they're co-travelers on the journey with us.
Yeah.
So, it's like they can feel that gratitude and appreciation. And also, perhaps from, the dimension they're in, they can also see where we're at and the progress. And, some of what has shifted as a result of how they moved things forward. And sometimes I think in techniques in shamanism, actually, it allows them to see that or view that more when you do bring them into the rituals. And then we get a deeper view of what is going on with them. So they propel us forward regardless, right? But I'm going to share this concisely, but I want to give an example. In the shamanic work I do, a lot of past lives come up, and Betty, in the work that you do, this all comes up as well. And so past lives will come up for people at times, but also lives of their ancestors will come up as well. And I recently had a session with someone where they were having this issue come up, and then we went into this deeper space and we connected with an ancestor who had the same issue, but this was, I'm going to say, probably around the 1740s or something. And the ancestor had died before they were able to see that they actually succeeded in moving things forward for their family. So in this example, it was like they made furniture and there was this style of a chair that was very unique. And the ancestor taught the son how to make the chair, and the son got a contract and was able to move to America with his family and experienced a lot of success and affluence. And then there were many generations after that that thrived in different ways as a result. But the ancestor had died like just before, knowing that this success had, come to the family. So in the session, it was like we were able to do a soul retrieval and show the ancestor, like, your work did come to fruition. And look at this whole line that shifted in such a magical way, but also like the intention that you had ever since you were 12 years old and wanted a better life and, to do something special, and the way that it was expressing, it did come true. And then for the person I was working with, it was like it transmuted the energy in the past and then it came forward. So she was able to also have a shift and go, oh my gosh, like I already have been successful with the thing that I'm doing, and I already have all the resources that I need, and I can feel how this is going to move forward in a way where many people are going to thrive and benefit. Um, so working in these spaces is can be really amazing, and those are the experiences that I have where there has been not just healing, but like closer contact with the ancestors and an awareness of their stories that we wouldn't necessarily have just through historical detail. Their emotions, and like you were saying, that spiritual energy, which is really pretty incredible.
Well, like you mentioned, the work I do, I do find more frequently than not If there's someone coming through as a guide, or with someone I'm doing a reading for, if that entity shows up and I address them or they want to be acknowledged, it is like 9 out of 10 times a grandmother or a great grandmother or a great grandfather. It's a couple of generations back, and they hang around in the family, or they hang around in the third dimension. They come into the earth plane to oversee the care of those children. So it may not be hands on, like if they were there, as a great grandmother, which some people are lucky enough to have. But if they move over, they don't leave the earth plane, or their ability to come in and out of the earth plane and check on those kids. They're always there. And it's interesting, when you think about, they could move on and they could go on to another, higher dimension, but a lot of them stay around the family. And it
Hmm.
may be something they taught someone or that they wanted to implement or have them bring forward. So those are the positive aspects of the ancestors, and they aren't so far removed like the ones that we don't understand and we didn't get to talk to. These might be people that our parents talked to, or that our
Right.
older brothers and sisters knew, and they were in our life, and now they just step over and they're on the other side, but they're still watching us, and they appear as guides.
Hmm.
Yeah. They come through as and they also, and this is even more interesting to me, if there's a spirit that's coming through to that family, that ancestor, that grandmother, great grandmother is watching that spirit. Like they're taking care of it. Like when you're away and your great grandmother or your grandmother watch your kids, they're watching that soul until it comes into an incarnation. And I've always found that fascinating because you
Yes.
think, they're like a babysitter. They're like, this is part of the soul family. It's part of the energy that has to be developed. So they're basically growing up on the other side, because I'll see them as a 3 or 4 year old child. And then when they're born, obviously they're a newborn baby, but the family members, and like you said, the men, like they want to coach children or give them that go get them sport, attitude or whatever,
Right.
those, they still do it from the other side. And it's been beautiful for me to connect with those beings. But when we say, well, another something, a funny note, I woke up thinking, my daughter, when my grandmother was close to the end of her life, my daughter was about 4 or 5, I think. And my grandmother told her, well, I want to talk to you about your ancestors. And she turned her head and kind of frowned, she said, I don't have ancestors. And my grandmother said, yes, you do. And she said, no. And she started crying. She said, I take a bath. I don't have ancestors. She thought it was a disease. She thought, and my grandmother, it just cracked my grandmother up because she was like, she said, ancestors are your family, sweetheart. They're the ones that, like, your grandma and your great grandma, like me, and your great great grandma and grandpa. And she said, oh, but she thought it was a disease or bugs or something that she had, that my grandmother was trying to say that she had, how. So think about the confusion in a child, in their mind, of what an ancestor really is. Like how many kids know what that is, right?
Right.
So one of the responsibilities of the ones that are here in the third dimension would be to tell those children for sure as much as you can tell them about their family history and about their ancestors and about that
Yes.
lineage.
Well, because part of the why also, I would say, is, at least for me, feeling supported and grounded. So having some awareness of that history, that lineage, but also being able to connect with them, for example, in a meditative space. So So part of the honoring, I'm bringing it up in my prayers and my invocation, but then in a meditative space, I'm leaving space for them to communicate. So there's a relationship there.
Mhm.
And that support and groundedness is a part of what I've referred to in other podcasts as the four communities. So it's,
Right,
self, other, nature, spirit. Well, the
right,
ancestors are overlapping. They're other,
right.
right? Which would also be people who are living here with us now on Earth. And then
Mhm.
their spirit as well, because they show up, like you're saying, as guides. And they have that role also. And I think that we sort of have, in one way, an epidemic of people feeling isolated for various different reasons these days. And I can honestly say that one of my biggest gifts, and maybe I've said this before, from a shamanic path and choosing this path is that I never feel lonely because I'm connecting with the trees, or I can connect with the guides or creator, or, of course, someone like a friend or my husband, but and self as well. So when you have a relationship with yourself, and when all of these are balanced, you can't feel lonely. And I think the ancestors really, in that regard, offer a lot of support because they can just offer love, but also guidance. Like you're saying, there's kind of many roles that they have where they're supporting us and offering guidance as well. So yeah.
Yeah, holding space is, I mean, I think that's a term like a new age thing where that became a saying, or like when you say namaste, a lot of people say things and they don't really have a meaning, or they don't really know what it involves or what it is. But when you hold space for something or whatever, that's one of the only ways that those that have moved on, that are beings of light now, can bring it to us, is if we hold space. And it is more serious, I think, to do that, just to offer that and say, anyone who has lessons, to bring, like when the shaman goes to the other side on a journey and he brings it back, it's aligning him or her. But if we don't pass that down, like all of those things that we need to hold space for them to drop in,
Right.
to leave with us. So we have to be seriously reminding ourselves to hold space for anything from the other side, or from other universes, other galaxies, other beings, that will help this planet, because we are part of the planet. It's like it's floating around, and was it just created and then thrown into orbit? And we're on it, and we're supposed to be taking care of it. So it's like those things that they can teach us, that were ancient things that are still true today. These things that have come down that spiritual lineage, or that ancestral line, or whatever, people may have suffered, and it doesn't mean that we have to suffer. We can have pain, but we don't have to choose to suffer. So we can remember that they suffered, and that's what the gift that they're giving us, that we can bypass that and jump, leap forward in our learning and in our balancing our inner being, inside, to that, to resonate or
Right.
to vibrate in that frequency, and let them drop that in, and not try to go into the future too far, to think about what if and what might, and whatever. Just allow that knowledge to come in, and remember the things we already know. And I talked about this in every podcast. I think it's just to remember who we are, and how powerful and multidimensional people are,
And
human.
why wouldn't we want to like take advantage of
It's a
it's
leap
like the
forward. Yeah.
yeah, the full expression of who we are. There's more resource than we realize,
It's
there's
all
more
inside us.
potential.
It's all inside us. And that is
Right.
because it's in the DNA. And those people, whatever their develops, their DNA development was, everything that's come down to us That's in there. We don't have to learn it. We have to remember it. And it's difficult concept for a lot of people because we are creatures of learning. We think we have to look everything up and scientifically prove everything and, go into research and it has to balance and make sense and everything. And, some things just need to be allowed and accepted. You don't have to know why. You don't have to research it. You don't have to prove it. You just allow it, then you remember that you have this in your DNA and it's coming through and it's expressing those things that those people and those ancestors went through to bring us forward to this stage of this evolution and ascension. So, it's more getting out of your own way, unblocking your it's too much information, that TMI, it's like, I don't need to know all that. I just need to accept that I already have this inside me in the blueprint of my DNA, and we don't think about it on that level, on the cellular level, but it's more, we want to know facts. We want to have it written. We want to see it. We want to, to believe it. You go inside and you resurrect that and you bring up everything that you already know and remember it and allow it, integrate it into your existence here now. I mean, it's pretty obvious to some people. It just goes without saying. They connect right away. Other people, it's a stretch. They
Right.
didn't to make it harder. They need more logic. They need for it to make sense. They have to have other people tell them. They have to see it on, the internet or whatever. If you just believe, like that's what's bringing, the shamanism forward. It's like, accept it, you know,
Right.
let it come in and integrate that into this experience. So it's huge if you have the luxury of being able to talk to an actual person, like in the Amazon or someone that lives without all the technology, that they just, how they live and they don't know any different. And it's so beautiful. They don't have all of that confusion and muddle going through their brain. They're just living the way that they always have for thousands of years.
Right, like at this stage, we can point to genetics and epigenetics, and there is some information out there now on what gets carried through our DNA that goes beyond, like, just if you have, a bigger nose or a crooked toe or
Wise, yeah.
something, like, yeah, these emotional imprints and these bigger imprints, there is some science for that. But, like, to your point, if we're going into the Amazon or something and we're connecting with more shamanic cultures, they don't even need those reference points, nor do they necessarily have an awareness of it, or there's a different understanding of it. But the results are still the same. The awareness of what has been brought forward from the past and the ancestors and others is still there in the knowing.
Well, there's a term that people use, I find really frequently, lately, especially, is it is what it is. It is what it is. And it's like, oh, what the heck does that mean, right? If you're in the Amazon, you there's plants, there's bushes, there's trees, there's mud, there's everything is there. It is what it is,
Right.
right? And that's what you have, and that's what you work with, right? So there, it is what it is. Here, it might be something else, or we may have to check that out. That may not
Right.
be what it is, but people use that term so loosely. It is what it is, It's like, if only they knew how truthful that is. It's like, if you are in the Amazon and you don't have an iPad and you don't have a cell phone and you don't, have all the technology, you realize that is what you have to work with. And you use everything. They use
Well,
everything.
and also, it is what it is more than meets the eye.
That's right.
even there,
Mhm.
like you mentioned, plants and bushes. And of course, how might I use part of this plant as a part of the structure of my home or for healing in a tea? But then there's also this relationship with the spirit of the plant, and there's an awareness of the
Mhm.
other dimensions and kind of like the spiritual context and the energetic context for these things. So, right, it is what it is, I would say, is more than meets the eye, but also depending on where you're saying this in the world and what culture, that is going to mean different things. What it
Yeah,
is means different things.
I know. It's very, it's astounding to watch these sayings that come through, that people don't realize how much power there is in that. And if they were in a place where they didn't have electricity and they didn't have technology or whatever, they would have to use the resources and their innate knowledge. They would have to discover it the way that the ancestors did, right?
Right,
They would have to work with what they had and say, oh, there are people that have survived being in a plane crash and they drop into a jungle and they have gashes and they put mud on the gashes to heal, and they heal, and sometimes without scarring, and these are things that people find out by, I think I'll try this, right? So going back to the things that we have that are the modern medicine, and people that go, doctors and shaman that go to the Andes or to the Amazon, or go to Peru or whatever, they take medicine, they take antibiotics, they take pain medicine. These are things that have evolved. Those things came from plants, you
right,
know I mean, it at some point they introduced those things to those people in those remote villages or whatever, and those developed somewhere outside in this society in a lab somewhere. But when you take it to a place, maybe more people will survive. Maybe the people that are using the old methods and then mud will do better than the
well,
people that take the medicine.
I think it's really important to stay connected to our intuitive knowing based on what you're saying.
Mhm.
So we have some great technology, and that can always be moving us forward. But there's
Right,
a reality to most of us, many of us have a computer, right? We know how to use the computer, and there's a lot of advantages it brings to us, but we don't, most of us know how to build a computer.
right,
So,
exactly.
if
Or
we
repair
didn't,
it.
yeah, if suddenly it didn't exist, I couldn't make a computer from the ground up and
Right.
just go, okay, now I can access my email again.
Yeah.
So there's a balance with how much energy is there, and then also staying connected to our knowing around what the resources in nature are and what the balance is there.
Mhm.
And, like you said, with, aspirin and that, being this modern thing, but it came from the plants and it came from,
So far, yeah. Yeah.
yeah, just,
And I mean, just going backwards, if you take out maybe a half or even more percentage of the things that we don't need to put in our body, and we simplify and we go back to just letting the body heal itself, we don't need to introduce all those strange things and have the body say, our nervous system go, what the heck was that you just put in there? It's like the nervous system is coming from the ancients. So
hmm.
that is already in your body. And that blueprint, or that map of the nervous system, if you start putting everything that you see on television, every drug that's named these crazy names, and they have people dancing and advertising them, and it's like, you can't get that in the jungle. You got to go to the pharmacist and you've got to have a doctor's prescription to get it.
Right.
And it's like, how do you know if you need it, and why are they advertising it on television? So if you do nothing, you don't take any of those things in most cases for symptomatic relief, you will get better. You'll get well if you just heal yourself and you take the time. We don't have to introduce all and every piece of technology or moving forward with all of these. Um, I want to say, like when you discover them, I don't think they're discovered. I think they're created.
Right.
Thoughts are created from chemicals. And so, once again, you have to say, why, if I see it on TV, it's going to be in my mind, and maybe that's what I'm going to take. And they're programming us to put all of these things in our body. Our bodies know that we need to just know what chemicals to send out from our
So
brain.
this is a slightly different angle, but kind of a cool example of what you're saying. So on my altar, I also have different things that are connected with my ancestors, and some of them are symbolic of, the heritage and just some of more of what I'm more generally aware of. And then some are literal objects. Like I have this, let's see if it'll come into view, this like tiny ring from my maternal grandmother. And so my paternal grandmother is alive and she actually has a 90th birthday coming up in October.
Huh.
And my maternal grandmother died a few years ago. Um, but what's interesting is I did a healing session recently where, and this was a session for myself, where I suddenly was going into the past, into my childhood when I would go up to the Adirondack Mountains in New York and spend the summers there with my maternal grandmother and my cousins. And so I think that there was a little bit of a narrative, or people were concerned. This was my impression when I went back into the journey that, maybe my grandmother was lonely. She lived in a log cabin in the mountains. She had neighbors, but they weren't very close by. One of my aunts was her neighbor, but it was still like a little ways away. And she was divorced, and so they were just concerned, like, is she getting out enough, or does she want to date, or whatever, like, I think also this was a lot, it was her children just being concerned, and they love her and rightly so. But when I went into this journey, what I felt was her connection to nature and her deep contentment at that stage in her life. And it was like, she lived simply, but she was in a beautiful place. I mean, you could smell not only the pine of the log cabin, but pine trees around everywhere outside. She had this little deck and there's no light pollution. So gorgeous stars at night. So she would sit out under the stars, and she kayaked on her own, actually, in some of the rivers near there into her 80s. And she would, take walks through some of the paths or even just down the road. And so it was simple, but it was like such a connection. And in the journey, I had this recognition that not only was she not lonely, but she was more than content and connected to nature. And I can remember as a kid having the feeling not only of just loving going up there to spend time with her and with my family and my cousins, but nature. It was like, oh, I want to, live this way at some point. And like this is going to be what I do when I grow up, and these sorts of things. And so the result of this healing experience was recognizing how she brought that to me, that awareness and that connection by living it, and the things she would say and do when I was around her. And now Matt and I often go to the mountains. We're in South Carolina now, so it's in northwestern North Carolina. And I have that same feeling out there. It runs so deep. And I'd venture to say that it extends, beyond her, and definitely connects to other ancestors who were living very close to nature, as we all did the further that we go back. Um, but there was this recognition and this kind of like what she had imparted in the journey that was really powerful. Um, so yes, I have those, tokens on my altar, but I also make this space is part of what we were talking about, right? To have the awareness of these things, and it can be really, really beautiful.
Well, even when you are in the forest, I mean, in the city, you have fresh things that you bring from the market. The market smells, like food, and hopefully it's a
Right.
clean market. And there's meat and everything, but they make sure that everything smells healthy or, not distasteful. And you take that stuff home and it goes through a process of either being eaten and, prepared and consumed or going bad or whatever. In a city, that process is sometimes disgusting. It's distasteful. When you're in the forest, you can smell the oxygen that the trees are giving off, especially after a rain, the way that the um, ions change in the atmosphere, the way that the light comes through the mist and the evaporation of the fog or the dew or whatever. And as you walk on in the leaves crunch, underneath your feet is decomposition and its greatest form. And it has a smell that is delicious. It's this smell of completion of the cycle, the way that it's supposed to be, not the way that we make it when we force it to come on a truck. And everything, that the water tastes different if you get
Right.
water from a stream or from a well there. And so you think about the things that have not been disturbed or tampered with. If you just let nature do what it does, there's a cycle that it goes through, and it's so refreshing to be out there. And even the stars are clearer because we don't have the lights from the city, so you can see better. But that type of experience is going back to how people lived, our ancestors lived. Like my grandmother was born in 1890, so her family went through the Civil War, her parents. And when you think about how they lived and what they saw and all those kind of things, life was so much simpler. And I think that inside, by trying to make it simple on the outside by using technology and speeding everything up, and trying to, if we just listen to that pace that they had, like a brook, like how the water sounds rushing over the rocks, and it has a music, you know. And so when you think about how they lived and what they appreciated about that lifestyle, that is kind of, I think, where we need to stop the move forward, where we eliminate nature and everything is all clinical and industrialized and all the things that we've seen the technology do. We still need to get back to nature, our connection to nature. And I think that that's one of the things that the ancestors that decide to stay here are trying to teach their grandchildren and their great grandchildren, to go outside and play, to do things with your friends, to
Right.
respect your parents, but to appreciate what they do for you, the food and everything. And it just, to me, it's like simple,
Yes.
it's a simple thing to conceive, but is it to implement it is a task.
Well, and what is coming up is, like you said earlier, those who are on the planet now in the 3D have a responsibility to share, like with their children about the ancestors, and
Mhm.
then also about this importance with the connection to nature.
Right.
Like in my example, I recognize my grandmother had imparted that to me, but maybe your parents can share that with you, or depending on where you're at, it's really preserving the importance. And like you said, what is that in an actionable way? Like go out and play outside with your friends, or my paternal grandmother actually, she is very into genealogy and she has been for years and years. So she was going through the records when they were obviously just like paper files, like the card catalog in the library or, whatever. And she's been able to share a lot about, because it's a like a fascination and a hobby of hers, it goes even beyond just the family to the extended family. So she's researched my husband's family, for example, and my sister's husband's family. And, she's come up with some really interesting things over time that people didn't know about their ancestors. And then, she found it in some record somewhere or she pieced something together. Um, One of the things was actually on my maternal side, my grandfather's mother, so my great grandmother, who lived to be 102, and so I knew her past college age. She, I mean, when, after I got out of college, but she was adopted, but it was at a time when you didn't talk about that. And so she only told, or only maybe like two people in the family knew, including her two sons, but they didn't talk about it. And my grandmother, through the census and sort of how my great grandmother and her sister showed up and a couple of other things, kind of pieced that together and asked me about it. And then I asked another family member and got confirmation. And anyway, then that led to some other interesting things that we discovered about her. And it was like, kind of more complexity and more to the story and being able to understand the person better, having kind of a broader idea of things. So anyway, not everyone, right, maybe has somebody who's studied genealogy in their family in depth, but that's why I think there's this balance of we can discover some of that, especially these days with like 23andMe and the blood tests and,
Yeah.
all different things. But if you have less information, that goes back to, the representing them on the altar and going into your meditative spaces and leaving that space open for communication and connection. And they can share not only like wisdom and teachings and help you, but also like some of their story at times as well. So,
If you think about being adopted, I mean, your family trauma from your ancestors and your lineage going up, back to I I have people that my grandfather, my dad's name, they signed the Constitution, you know, and you think about, you don't look back and you don't think that you would have known if you were alive then, you would have known somebody that was part of the founding, the forefathers, or as they state that, and you think, oh my God, somebody in my family actually signed the Declaration of Independence, or those type of things are, if you're adopted, most of your family has a different lineage, or that it goes even soul wise or spiritually, right?
right,
So it's curious because I always said that about like when children are born astrologically, you look at when they came in and what planets were in their sign or whatever, and you think about if there's a C-section and that child was supposed to be born like on the 4th of April or whatever, and there's a C-section, which is the right date? Like, how is that going to influence them moving forward, right?
right,
Well, obviously, if we believe in the way things come to pass, it's the right time when the C-section happened.
right,
That's when
right.
that child comes forth, right?
Hmm.
So, but it was always interesting, like, oh, if they're born on this date, they're going to be a Leo, but if they're born on that date, they're going to be a Cancer, And so, do you really should you care about that, or does that change their whole life trajectory? You know, it's there's so much complexity to this um, information or looking back, because and I always have been impressed by like the indigenous tribes that only talk, um, they carry things on just verbally. They don't write anything down. That think about that, like how much would have been told at your grandmother's knee, like how much she told you about my grandmother told me about her mother and during the Civil War and, the what they went through and the her bringing that forward and then me telling my daughter or my dad putting his part in and then me telling my daughter each thing that we didn't get to experience ourselves, we hear it or see it, from someone else's perspective or from a movie or, we don't really have actual connection to that, how it took place, what they actually went through. And I feel like there's a lot lost, that we have to try to figure out. So finding a ritual or a ceremony or something that and you have to experiment, I feel a little bit to find the ritual or the meditation or some kind of even if you make up your own ceremony, it doesn't have to be by a book or by someone's direction to let the earth know that we are practicing those things to connect with the past, which is actually not the past. It's really happening now. It's all happening now. So connecting to some kind of self-developed thing that centers us, but you don't have to find a meditation. You can make up your own. These are all things that we should be experimenting with and letting our children experiment because they have this recollection of who they've been before they were children. Obviously they go back to in a spiritual body. I just feel like everybody needs to find their own way of bringing things back to simplicity. And this comes through every podcast. Make it simple, keep it simple, you know.
So, there's a theory that resonates quite a bit with me that the energy field of the Earth, of the planet, is what holds it like holds the frequency of linear time. So the theory basically says, and I'm not going to go into too much detail, but it's something that you can look into. And it's sort of like, okay, we have an energy field, right? Everything has an energy field. The nodes and the different aspects of the energy field of the Earth, the way that it's oriented is what allows us to basically orient ourselves on the planet in the 3D. So linear time is a part of that field so that we can be oriented and experience things in the way that we do. But we also know that time is not actually linear. And this idea of our ancestors as co-travelers with us and things happening now and not just happening in the past, it's another challenging thing to wrap your mind around. But I'm going to kind of like take it just like in an out there direction for a moment. So the image that I chose today has this path, and then it feels like it's going out towards the sun or another planet and all these other planets around it. And the reason it resonated was because it felt like it does represent how we are on a path and we're experiencing things mostly in a linear way, while also having an awareness that that's not the full picture or the full story. And there's all these other possibilities. So our ancestors and these timelines, it can extend perhaps even beyond human ancestors. And so, there's a lot out there about like cosmic influence and aliens and ETs, and even how, their DNA may have merged with ours at an earlier point. And to be honest, this is another thing that does resonate with me based on all of the shamanic experiences that I've had and just kind of what seems like it would make the most sense. But I'm just saying, what if? Like, right, we don't know. But in a lot of the shamanic journeys, I'll say, for example, there could be past lives that people have where they're on another planet or they're interacting with beings that are on another planet. And in fact, we have a lot of ruins and temples on this planet, and like Chaco Canyon actually is a place in the US, in New Mexico, I believe, that has some really interesting like depictions on the walls and that sort of
Petroglyphs, yeah.
thing. Yeah, so there is evidence on this planet that beings from other planets have visited here and are potentially could even be here now. This definitely is, that's my belief again, based on my experience. But on the one hand, there's this value, like Betty, you were saying, keep things super simple. But what's kind of miraculous when you do that is that there's so much possibility um, in the space that's simple, if that makes sense. I don't know if I'm saying it in the best way, right? But like if we're living this simple connected life and we're, meditating a little bit and we're out in nature and we're grounded in our physical human experience, but we're leaving space for the spiritual and space for these possibilities, we have this awareness of vastly bigger pictures with cosmic energies and perhaps alien ancestors and other ancestors out in the cosmos. And no, we don't have the full narrative or the story, and we don't exactly know all the pieces of the puzzle. But it's another thing where it's like, how could you feel alone when you look up at a starry sky, or when you go into maybe a shamanic journey or meditation where you have connection with these energies and beings? Again, whatever the full picture is, there is a lot of connection and a lot of ancestry and a story that we're a part of that tapestry. We're a part of that bigger kind of, I don't know, story, picture, interconnection, whatever it all is. So I don't just find that comforting, I find it pretty amazingly miraculous. And I think that,
Inspiring. It's
yeah, it's incredible. And the more that we tune in, the more that we discover. So,
well, the more simple or the more that you clear back to the 0 point, that's the matrix, that's the genesis, that's the beginning of something way more complex that will, evolve from that. So, like, I think sometimes, like debriding a wound, you think what's healing, and then the nurse comes in and they take a brush and they scrape off the dead skin, and you think, oh my God, I'm gonna die. This hurts so bad, like a burn or something. And if you realize that taking off the decaying, making it simple, keeping it clean, and new cells generate and it heals and it doesn't even look like anything happened. So it's the same thing with almost anything. If you take it back to zero, take it back to empty, take, like yourself, non-existent, lose yourself, don't have an identity, you can become so much more, and you can create from those matrices, simple genesis, and it starts with nothing. And so I think, like, when I talk about making it simple, it's like you sitting in the woods and just enjoying what's there, just enjoying being. And you don't have to figure it all out, And I think that if people get back to that center point or that 0 point, and they to exist in the third dimension, you have to have duality and polarity and all the things that confuse people. But when you make it simple, you allow for growth. I feel like that's kind of why I emphasize that, because when you take out all of the facts and things that confuse us, and the things that we too much learning or whatever, we don't know what to do with it, science will catch up. Art and science, obviously hand in hand, are going to change everything. But when we get to that place where we realize that just being, not having to do, just be, you're a human being. So you don't have to be constantly doing and being active. You just bring yourself to that center point and create from there. Inside yourself, you have all this call upon that, and call upon the ancestors like you do in all of the invocations. You say, uh, anyone of love and light, the beings, the ascended masters, and the ancestors. And like I said, they are sidekicks to us. They're there, those people that were just twice removed, like one generation or two. They're there spiritually in our spirit team. We have a group of guides. They're there to kind of oversee what they laid the groundwork for. So, you know that they're always there kind of checking to see that we're carrying the torch forward.
Absolutely. I've seen in my own past that anything related to growth, carrying the torch forward when I'm in a place of maybe like indecision or not knowing, that's when they come in the strongest with an opinion. And it doesn't necessarily mean that, you have to listen per se, just, and that's true with all of your guides and energies, it's offering up something to consider. But it's also very powerful to have that line of communication. Um, I actually had something happen yesterday. It's like, so I have this little it's a moonstone ring, and I got it when I was visiting my grandmother back in April, and I've been wearing it on my middle finger on this hand ever since. And yesterday was the first day of fall, and anyway, it broke while I was outside and walking the dog. And oftentimes when I wear one of these stone rings, they always last very different amounts of time. I mean, sometimes I've had one that lasted for years that I never took off.
Cornelian, the one that you had.
Yeah, so this one, right, it was only a few or a collection of months from April until now, but it represents new beginnings. And Moonstone has some other associations also. But when it broke, I was outside thinking about the ancestors and one of my ancestors in particular. And I just like looked down and the ring had broken. And so, leave it up to your own. I suppose there's a lot of conclusions I could draw, but generally in that moment, it was just feeling like, as I was connecting with the ancestors, the energy came through to sort of emphasize, like, yep, you're in a new cycle. So
And
usually
that's
now I'll put this ring away, right? And then it's like, what crystal am I choosing to support in this new cycle? But it was just, yeah, it was kind of cool the way that it all converged in that moment. So,
and just the beauty of noticing it, that it
yeah.
didn't get past you and it didn't just drop away and get lost, that you
Mhm.
actually witnessed that. And they have so many beautiful ways of connecting with us. That's why we need to shut down, turn off all the technology, find a place where you can go inside and look around in there, you know.
Right.
I feel like our creative brain is like going into a store where you can buy anything you need to make anything you want, and you just have the power to create. Because, like, in going into Michael's and you want to make a flower arrangement, and you go in there and you get all the components, and that's kind of how life is. It zeroes us out and brings us back to center, and we go inside and say, "Oh my gosh, I have so much in here to work with." I don't have to rely on everything outside. I have all of this creativity inside me that I can use to create. Well, I have a mantra that I say, I am all I need. I have all I need. I create what I need, or all I need. So
Yes.
yeah, we go
Love that.
back inside and back to the shamanic principle of as above, so below, or as within, so without, to align ourselves, to get in alignment, even though there's chaos and even though there's uncertainty, which, has always been, there is a place of alliance. There is a place of being quiet, going in and exploring that part of us that I think sometimes we look too hard. We look too far. We need to look right here. We need to go inside and research that and look and see what can be created from it. instead of looking for it outside us. You know, we're always looking for answers outside us. And I think I probably say this every time, but you do have to go within, remember the things that are in our bodies, in our nervous system, in our spiritual self, and connect to those things and sort out, the garbage. Just throw it aside. You don't have to believe everything you see and hear. You just have to feel what's right. And I think that we have that ability. I think that we are, if we think with our heart, and I also say that and I have said that probably in every, all 12, think with your heart. Don't,
Right.
don't just think with your brain because it's programmed. It's just the hardware that, we are programmed with. You have to think with your heart, which translates into feeling. That's how you have to live, by feeling, not
Well,
thinking. You don't have to analyze everything. You just can have a feeling and you can go with it and you can focus on that and drop into your heart and just let all the other stuff go out into the universe and let it be transmuted. All the negatives, all the things that you see that you don't want to deal with or whatever, you just have to drop into your heart space and feel what is right to do.
so there, yeah, there's that aspect of simplicity to come back to. And also the ancestors can help kind of show us the way with that or give examples of what that looks like. Um, we just have a few minutes left, and I just want to offer up to people. Perhaps through listening, you've gotten some ideas on how to honor or, embrace and connect with your own ancestors. But if you have rituals that you already do or ways that you already do this, I would love to hear about them. I've got my few things that I do, but I'm always open to, especially in a special ritual or ceremony, bringing in new ways to connect. So, let us know. And then, Betty, if you have closing comments, I feel like this was such a great topic. There's so many areas that you
Mhm.
could even expand on more, and it feels very timely. So I'm just feeling very like centered with the energy, but also excited about it. Um, and when you're ready, we can close as well. So thank
Yeah,
you everyone listening.
I think that what I said about the readings and, being a medium, it's like I'm blessed and I'm grateful and I'm, touched by the ability to connect with these beings for people. And if there is anybody that would like to connect with their ancestors, that does quite frequently happen when I'm doing readings. um, Maybe they want to have a message come through to you, and that's why you're prompted to do it. Or maybe you would just like to be more curious about what we've talked about and find someone in your lineage, and see who is around you, because I find a lot of people don't know who's around them. They feel something, but they didn't know it was their great Aunt Bertha or whatever. It's like, oh, that was her. She was there all the time, kind of guiding me and protecting me. And so if anybody would like to do a reading and see who comes through, we can welcome them and see what they have to say. And that oftentimes lines up with, somebody that hears this may have been wondering about that, may have a question or may be interested. And I'm happy to do that. So if anybody wants to get in touch, that's something that we can, find out personally, individually.
Yeah, I'd like to tag on to that every psychic can be a medium, but every medium is not necessarily a psychic. To some extent, this seems to be true. And so there are people out there who are mediums, and that is strictly what they focus on, bringing people through. But my experience with Betty as well is that she very much so can bring through your ancestors and work in mediumship. But she has the added benefit of this psychic awareness that really goes in many different directions. So I think that it can give you a much It's not about comparisons, I suppose, but it gives you a very holistic perspective of things, and her perspective is incredibly broad. So I definitely recommend it.
Well, I feel like people will make an appointment and they want to know something and it won't work out, and either myself or they are not available, and things get waylaid and put over here and put over there, and people get freaked out like, I'm so sorry, I'm wasting your time. And it's like spirit aligns these meetings. Like I will make an appointment, and if it doesn't work out, I know it's spirit. It's not this, world around us. It's being masterfully aligned with
Right.
spirit. And it's at the exact time, the word we use here, that it's supposed to happen in the time that spirit intends. So if there's no one to come through, or there's, and I can feel a plethora of beings around me right now during this podcast, which tells me that my ancestors are knocking on my door. And
Mhm.
in this cosmic, beautiful display that you have behind you, um, these things have been moving to me. So there's something to be said in that. It's
Yes.
you've got them around you as well, because these little blurbs that are going behind, it's like this is rotating. This is actually rotating.
Hmm.
So anybody that's interested in that, when it's the right time for you, you'll meet someone like me, or you can call me, obviously, on the contacts that we have here. Um, and it'll just fall into place organically, because that's the way spirit works. It will happen when everything is aligned. So, don't be too harsh on yourself, and don't worry about offending the person that's doing it. If you understand it, it's the way it works. So, shall we close?
Yes.
Okay, thank you everybody for sharing our anniversary podcast.
Woohoo!
Woohoo! May we meet again. Sit in circle, tending our hearts, cultivating our shared love and joy, supporting the ascension of our beautiful planet. Until then, our light to yours. Aho.
Oh, thank you, Betty.
Thank you, Pavan.